From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now! Longtime white supremacist James von Brunn is accused of opening fire in the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, killing a security guard and injuring another. It's the third recent shooting involving a gunman with ties to the White Nationalist Movement. The shooting of Dr. George Tiller, allegedly by anti-abortion activist Scott Roeder, and the shooting of 3 police officers in Philadelphia in April. We'll speak with one of the nation's leading researchers on right-wing hate groups, Leonard Zeskind, author of Blood and Politics, the history of the White Nationalist Movement from the margins to the mainstream. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A white supremacist with a long history of anti-Semitic activity is in custody today after opening fire at the Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C., killing a security guard and wounding another. The gunman is 88 years old, James von Brunn. He's critically injured after other guards returned fire. The slain security guard, Stephen Johns, was 39 years old. Washington, D.C. Mayor Adrian Fenty said police believe von Brunn acted alone.
In these days and times, you never know when someone is going to grab a gun and use it in an inappropriate way, as was done today. But we want to thank the heroism of the security guards, the Metropolitan Police Department, for being on hand very early to make an arrest. We believe we have someone who was a lone gunman, but we're going to spend the night investigating any and all other leads.
The attack marks at least the third recent shooting involving a gunman with ties to the White Nationalist Movement. We'll have more on this story after headlines. The Senate's confirmed the nomination of General Stanley McChrystal to head the occupation of Afghanistan. McChrystal's promotion was approved Wednesday despite controversy over the abuse of prisoners by forces under his authority at the Joint Special Operations Command. McChrystal oversaw a secretive program to hunt down and assassinate suspected terrorists around the globe. The New York Times reports McChrystal has been given carte blanche in choosing his subordinates, including many special operations veterans that could be linked to prisoner abuse. Senior military officers say McChrystal is putting together a corps of 400 officers and soldiers who will rotate between the United States and Afghanistan for at least 3 years. On Capitol Hill, a House subcommittee held a hearing Wednesday to consider single-payer health care. It was the first time a congressional panel had taken up single-payer in the ongoing debate over health care reform. House Judiciary Chair John Conyers criticized Democratic leaders for declaring single-payer off the table.
There's some notion that universal single-payer health care is off the table. Well, that raises a very important question. If you take the most popular health care reform measure and take it off the table, heaven knows what it is, I guess you think you're left with. This is the most popular form, and it would be very unlike the party in the majority now to determine that the most popular system would not even be examined. I am asking for a hearing in every committee, and if they will let us into the Senate as well.
Judiciary Chair Conyers is the sponsor of House Resolution 676, which would grant universal health care to all Americans by making the government the lone provider of medical coverage. In other health care news, the nation's largest physician organization has announced it'll oppose Democratic plans for a new government-sponsored insurance program that would compete with private insurers. In a statement, the American Medical Association said health care should be provided solely through, quote, private markets. The announcement comes just days before President Obama is set to travel to Chicago to address the AMA on Monday. The AMA represents around 250,000 doctors across the United States. Its position comes despite recent polls showing as many as 60% of doctors support the creation of a national public health insurance plan. A doctor who worked in the clinic of the slain abortion provider, Dr. George Tiller, has announced he intends to continue performing later-term abortions in Kansas. Dr. Leroy Carhart was one of a team of physicians to work with Dr. Tiller before his murder last month. Speaking to the Associated Press, Dr. Carhart declined to say whether the abortions would continue at Tiller's clinic or whether he'd open a new site. His announcement comes one day after Tiller's family announced the clinic's permanent closure. It had been one of the only in the country to perform abortions in the third trimester. The Obama administration set to announce today new regulations of mountaintop removal, the controversial coal mining practice that has caused extensive environmental damage in the Appalachian region. The changes include ending fast-track approval for new mining permits and imposing a more extensive environmental review. Interviewed by The Washington Post, the chair of the White House Council on Environmental Quality, Nancy Sutley, said the administration hasn't ruled out seeking a complete ban on mountaintop removal, with discussions still in the early stages. The Obama administration's appointed a Washington, D.C. attorney to become the so-called compensation czar, overseeing the salaries of top executives at bailed-out financial firms. Kenneth Feinberg will have authority to set the compensation for executives at 7 taxpayer-rescued companies, including Citibank, Bank of America, and General Motors. The White House, however, has dropped an initial pledge to cap executives at $500,000 a year. In Peru, lawmakers have temporarily suspended 2 land use laws that led to an indigenous uprising and dozens of deaths in the ensuing police crackdown. Indigenous groups have opposed the laws that would allow an unprecedented wave of logging, oil drilling, mining, and agriculture in the Amazon rainforest. On Wednesday, the Peruvian Congress voted to suspend the laws, but for an unspecified time. Indigenous leader Ephraim Pitzango Wasi said the protests will continue until the laws are fully repealed.
Our reaction is not to suspend the strike, but to continue until the end. As you have heard, this measure is suspended only for 90 days. This is not convenient for us, the indigenous population. We will gather more and continue fighting until the end.
Peruvian President Alan Garcia's government passed the land laws under fast-track authority he'd received to facilitate implementation of the U.S.-Peru Free Trade Agreement. UN Security Council members have agreed on a new round of sanctions in response to North Korea's recent nuclear test and missile launches. The new measures include asking countries to inspect North Korea vessels carrying suspicious cargo and requiring them to deny the vessels fuel. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Susan Rice, praised the agreement.
We tabled a draft resolution to be considered by all colleagues on the Security Council, which we think provides a very strong, very credible, very appropriate response to the provocative nuclear test that North Korea launched and its subsequent activities.
The UN Security Council is expected to approve the sanctions in a vote Friday. In Pakistan, the United Nations has withdrawn most of its staff from the northwestern city of Peshawar following the killing of 2 officials in a massive truck bombing of a luxury hotel. The pullout's heightening concerns over the plight of the more than 2 million people who fled their homes in the U.S.-backed offensive on Taliban militants in neighboring Swat Valley. On Wednesday, the U.S. envoy to Pakistan and Afghanistan, Richard Holbrooke, praised the offensive in Washington.
What I saw in Pakistan on this trip was the slow emergence of a consensus behind the government's actions. Everywhere, there was a dramatic change in attitudes from my previous trips because of the outrages of the Taliban and their supporters.
The private military firm formerly known as Blackwater, Z, is facing a new lawsuit over the August 2007 killing of an Iraqi civilian in Hilla. The case was filed on behalf of the surviving relatives of 75-year-old Hussein Saleh Rabia. At the time, Rabia's relatives said he had pulled over to the side of the road to let a Blackwater convoy pass. The last vehicle in the convoy allegedly opened fire when Rabia pulled back onto the road. The suit also alleges Blackwater employees are guarding employees of the International Republican Institute in Iraq, despite an Iraqi government ban. In Oregon, 5 current and former Army National Guard soldiers have filed a lawsuit accusing the war contractor KBR of knowingly exposing them to a cancer-causing chemical in Iraq. A group of 16 Indiana National Guard soldiers filed a similar lawsuit last year. The soldiers were providing security for KBR during repairs of a water treatment plant in southern Iraq shortly after the U.S. invasion. The National Guard members claim the site was contaminated for 6 months by hexavalent chromium, one of the most potent carcinogens on record. They allege KBR knew the plant was contaminated but concealed the danger. Attorneys for the soldiers say they expect several West Virginia National Guard members to file a similar suit. The lawsuits follow the release of a new federal report detailing waste and abuse by war contractors in Iraq and Afghanistan. The Commission on Wartime Contracting says auditors have questioned